Welcome back, everyone, and officially good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Kim Kranz. In 2019, Kim Kranz was named the first Vice President of Athlete Health and Wellness at USA Gymnastics, the national governing body for the sport in the United States. Kranz's key responsibilities include overseeing, managing, and further developing the organization's health and wellness strategy to provide athletes at all levels with holistic development support so they are better equipped for success within and beyond the sport. Kranz has more than 25 years experience in physical therapy and sports medicine with a focus on sports nutrition, positive coaching, and sports psychology. She served as the Director of Sports Medicine and Orthopedic Surgery Services and Neurosurgery at Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters. Kim Kranz earned her Doctor of Science in Physical Therapy from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and graduated with a BS in Physical Therapy from the University of Wisconsin. And with that, I will hand it over to Kim. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, I think we're good. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this conference. I'm really honored to be here. It might be a little bit odd for those of you attending to see someone here from USA Gymnastics talking about children's human rights. You all know this story. But the reason that I'm here is because our organization under new leadership is really committed to ensuring that this never happens again and to ensure that the human rights of young athletes are always protected within our sport and outside of our sport. And so I want to share our story with all of you to ensure that others can learn from our history and hopefully prevent this from happening in the future. As an organization, of course, we represent gymnastics, but we also understand our role on the larger stage of youth sports. We owe it to our survivors to learn, to do better, and truthfully to share what we've learned with anyone involved in youth sports who will listen. So I'm incredibly grateful to the organizers for inviting us to share our story. We know that the hundreds of women who stood up to this criminal had their human rights violated as young girls and women. And we also know that their stories are just the tip of the iceberg. We know that the human rights of athletes are still being violated every day in the United States and across the world in all sports. So we at USA Gymnastics bear a heavy burden because of our history, and we feel that our mission extends not only in gymnastics, but to help others in youth sports understand our journey and how everyone involved in sports at any level can ensure that their athletes are safe. So today I'm going to share a bit of our story in the hopes that when you see these types of patterns emerging in any setting, you will immediately recognize what the leadership before us did not or possibly chose not to acknowledge. I'm also going to share our pathway to changing the culture in our organization, a journey that truly never stops. Our journey now is really focusing on the well-being of our athletes over all other priorities. For these women who are shown here receiving the Arthur Ashe Courage Award and all of the other athletes within our organization, we know that this work never ends, and we take this responsibility very seriously. So the story of the gymnastics survivors of sexual abuse starts long before any of them ever met Larry Nassar. Some say that it likely started when the US hired Bela Karolyi and adopted Soviet styles of training that allowed Nadia Comaneci at the age of 14 to be awarded the first ever 10.0 in the Olympics. I would posit that abuse in sports started even earlier and set the stage for what happened in our sport. So I think it's important to understand the history of youth sports to help us understand how we got here. Organized youth sports began in the early 1900s as a way to teach primarily lower class boys the American values of self-sacrifice, obedience, self-control, and loyalty, which would presumably prepare them to be physical laborers in the new industrial society which was emerging. As early as the 1930s, some scholars were warning the public about competitive sport and really noting that this could be damaging physically and emotionally for children. This view impacted the availability of youth sports in schools, as many education leaders felt that, quote, rigorous sport competition took away from children's free play activity, ultimately damaging their normal physical and mental development. So this led to youth pay-for-play leagues, including Pop Warner and Little League Baseball, which are still around. These emerged in the early to late 1930s. And most parents in the mid-19th century believed that the positive aspects of youth sports far outweighed the negative. In 1950, under the governance of the NCAA, colleges developed the athletic scholarship as a way to pay prospective student athletes. Parents very quickly realized that if their child was a top-tier athlete, they were guaranteed a free college education. And so some parents really pushed their children to succeed in sports in ways that were abusive. In 1972, Title IX forced schools to distribute resources, including scholarships, more equitably, and women became eligible for more athletic scholarship opportunities. So this really opened women to the same type of abuse in sports. As sport participation in pay-for-play leagues grew in the late 1970s and early 1980s, several organizations formed to promote and educate those involved with youth sport programming. These organizations arose out of a need. Organizations like the North American Youth Sport Institute, the National Council of Youth Sport Directors, YMCA Youth Sport Training Programs, National Youth Sports Coaches Association, and American Sport Education Programs developed programs promoting youth sport coaches training and official coaching certification programming, as well as research agendas to improve guidelines for coaches. However, unlike in most other countries, in the United States, there continues to be no formal education or competency requirement to become a paid youth sports coach. Most youth sports organizations do not require their coaches to complete any training at all to become a coach. So let me reiterate that. There is really absolutely no training requirement for most sports coaches to have any education in youth development principles or coaching best practices, and there's no competency evaluation. Most other Western countries require sports coaches to have a master's degree in a coaching discipline and maintain licensure through continuing education. There are, of course, in the US, some exceptions. So US Soccer, USA Track and Field, and USA Football are a few examples of organizations that do have a clear pathway for coaches and require coaches to complete training appropriate to the level of the athlete that they are coaching. However, this training is developed by the organization. It's not regulated. The training is often focused on skill development rather than child development. So the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, which I will talk a little bit more about later, is another source of coach education. The center was created by Congress in 2016 and does require those who are participants in a national governing body to complete training on safeguarding principles. I want to point out, though, that there's no requirement for those outside of safe sport jurisdiction to complete any type of coaching training in most sports, and none of the training within safe sport focuses on child development. So really my call to action, if there are any people on this conference with influence, is that the United States needs to develop a national coaching certification program with a focus on child development and children's human rights, and require that all paid sports coaches complete the curriculum and pass a certification test. There absolutely needs to be a baseline understanding of child development and coaching standards, just like there are standards for the person who cuts your hair or gives you a tattoo or teaches our kids in school every day. There's really a lot at stake here. And so I think all of three plays a big part in our story at USA Gymnastics. I want to read you the headline from this article. It says, quote, "I have made their lives miserable. That famed gymnastics teacher Bella Caroli says about the rival coaches who criticize his ruthless methods. But he could say the same about the girls he is training to become Olympic champions," end quote. That I've read that many times. It always gives me chills to read that quote. And a lot of gymnasts point to a moment in time when they feel that gymnastics culture changed. After the Carolis defected to the US and became successful US coaches, coaching Mary Lou Retton to Olympic fame, the culture of elite gymnastics was spotlighted. Emotional and physical abuse of gymnasts was the norm and was deemed to be required in order to build perfection. This culture trickled down to recreational gyms who saw the US winning gold medals under this oppressive but celebrated system. In this 1991 Texas Monthly article, the author writes, quote, "Caroli rules his pixies through intimidation. He drives off the weak and molds the survivors exactly in his image. In practice, he allows no emotion in his gymnasts, no giggling, no crying. They do not speak unless spoken to, end quote. I think just hearing that quote, you can really imagine what it felt like to be a gymnast in his gym. The culture of elite gymnastics camps was truthfully complete and unilateral control of everything around the athletes. The Karolyis themselves had all of the power in the decision-making authority. There were no checks and balances in place. The Karolyis decided who would or would not be allowed to attend the camps, and selection procedures for international competitions were largely subjective. The only path to the Olympics in gymnastics was through the Karolyis and through the ranch. The ranch, which the camp was known as, was isolated, with the closest level 1 trauma hospital so far away that if there was a major emergency, they needed a helicopter to get there. According to reports, during these camps at the ranch, coaches checked athletes' suitcases for food that they were trying to sneak in, yet not enough food was being provided. The athletes were severely underfed. Water breaks were withheld. The rooms where the athletes slept were described as rustic. There was no cell phone service. Parents were not allowed to come to the ranch. Training was intense, with overconditioning occurring. Perfection was demanded. Athletes could not speak up, or they would be threatened with being kicked out and losing any opportunity they had to achieve their Olympic dreams, because this was the only path. They were gaslit and their voices were completely silenced. If you were injured, you were kicked out. The Karolyis had no use for injured gymnasts. There was a new girl to put in that place. So as a result, injuries were rarely reported or discussed. The only option for these girls was to endure this abuse or lose out on their dreams. Outside of the ranch, coaches often mimicked what they saw at these national team camps and developmental camps. They attended trainings by the Karolyis to learn their methods and apply them in their own gyms. They saw the success and they wrote off these techniques as necessary. Indeed, this was a prevailing culture in many sports settings that many of us on this call experienced with some of our sports coaches who felt that implicit obedience was really the goal of sports. Within and outside of sport, for many generations, children were not encouraged to see themselves as someone who had value and worth. As a Gen Xer myself, I recall my parents saying to me that children are to be seen and not heard when they had guests over. And I suspect that many of you recall this as well. In my generation, many of us were told that boys don't cry, or to stop crying before I give you something to cry about. Children were rarely permitted to have emotions. So it's a little bit not a surprise to me that these coaches within gymnastics and outside of gymnastics were not more deeply scrutinized by parents and society. If kids told their parents, they were likely dismissed, because even within our own families, our voices were often not permitted. So it's probably not much of a surprise then that in a situation like the one at the ranch, where the girls' basic needs of food, water, warmth, and rest and recovery are not being met, where they don't feel safe with their coaches, where their voices are being diminished, where physical misconduct is rampant, and where they're being told both verbally and non-verbally that they are nothing. So in this situation, when someone comes along who can relieve a bit of the suffering and meet these basic needs, the girls are drawn to him. And in fact, this is exactly the situation that Nasser took advantage of with the girls at the ranch and many other athletes outside of elite gymnastics. He found a place in this environment to groom these young girls by providing them with their basic needs and psychological needs. He gave them food, a safe space, a friend who they could tell things that they couldn't tell their coaches. He provided compassion. He was someone that the girls could talk to, and he listened. He empathized with them. He brought them foods that they were forbidden by their coaches to have. He took care of their injuries and provided them relief from pain. He provided what all of the other adults around these girls did not. All of the survivor stories have that in common. He was the good guy, and he got them to trust him. And I think many people may remember this photo. Through his career working with USA Gymnastics and through his exposure at the Olympics, he got the whole country to trust him. Gymnastics officials, other physicians, coaches, parents. girls from all over Michigan, where Nasser lived, and all around the country came to see the gymnastics doctor. So when he began to sexually abuse these girls in the context of medical care, they of course continued to trust that these so-called treatments were necessary. I cannot emphasize enough, however, that had the dignity of these girls been respected by those around them, this abuse would have been much more difficult to perpetrate and perhaps would not have happened. It's also no surprise that when some of these girls began to report these so-called treatments, their concerns were dismissed. No one had listened to their voices for years, so why would anyone listen to their voices now? So they told themselves, just like their coaches had for years, that they were wrong. They had been conditioned for years to not trust their own thoughts, feelings, and physical pain. Their stories are heartbreaking, and none of us can change the past and undo what happened to these young girls. What we must do is make sure that it never happens again, and that's truly why I'm here. I hope that from our story, you can identify patterns that could lead to abuse, and that's why USA Gymnastics is becoming a global leader in human rights in sports. Our organization failed our athletes in so many ways. Because of this, our entire leadership team,
I'm not sure I understand.
Our entire leadership team and every employee in our organization carries a heavy burden of responsibility to these women to learn from the mistakes of the organization and to teach anyone who will listen to us not only what we did wrong, but also how to prevent this from happening in the future. So in light of what happened then, let's explore some of the cultural changes that came both within and outside of USA Gymnastics. In the midst of the Nasser hearings in 2017, the U.S. Center for Safe Sport was created by the USOPC and federally authorized by Congress in the Protecting Young Victims from Sexual Abuse and Safe Sport Authorization Act. It was created to investigate and enforce violations of the Safe Sport Code, which prohibits sexual abuse, child abuse, physical and emotional misconduct in sport. In light of the scope of the abuse perpetrated, in 2018, Congress held hearings on preventing abuse in Olympic and amateur athletics. In 2019, the Empowering Olympic and Amateur Athletes Act was passed by Congress. These regulations, although not perfect, finally provided young athletes with a process to report human rights violations in sport. This was also a major step to providing not only standards, but also accountability. I do want to emphasize, however, that these protections for young athletes through the U.S. Center for Safe Sport only apply to those athletes who are a participant in a national governing body. According to the National Council of Youth Sports, about 60 million children participate in organized sports each year, and only about 16 million are under the rules and protections of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. 82% of young athletes are not given these rights. Absolutely no one is regulating that space. So let that sink in. What does that mean? That means that if a child is not covered by Safe Sport and a coach is using abusive coaching techniques, there is no standardized path to reporting or resolution of that complaint. It's completely up to the leaders in that organization to figure out what to do. Maybe that coach gets fired if you're lucky, but nothing stops that coach from going to coach with another organization. Likewise, if a coach is suspended by the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, there are really no comprehensive checks and balances in place to stop that coach from moving to an organization outside of the jurisdiction of the center. This is an enormous gap in child protection, and we've seen it within our sport. We have seen coaches get suspended by the center and just go coach under another gymnastics organization. My opinion is that all coaches should be licensed, and there should be a regulatory body overseeing their profession, just like there's a board of medicine or a board of cosmetology. So within our organization, we knew that change had to be complete. The entire board was dissolved and all of the leaders within the organization were terminated. There really needed to be a complete refresh because trust had been completely broken. In 2019, after the naming of a completely new board, the board hired a new CEO, Lili Leung. Lili was a high-level gymnast at the University of Michigan who was herself treated by Nasser. Lili had always had compassionate coaches who respected her human rights, and she really understood that respect for human rights of athletes was not mutually exclusive to competitive success. She believed then and still believes now that athletes will actually be more successful when their human rights are respected. She understands that abuse happens when winning is prioritized over athlete mental and physical well-being. Abuse happens when there's no infrastructure to support the athlete voice. Abuse happens when there's a power imbalance with coaches and administrators having unilateral control. And abuse happens when there are no accountability measures. And she understood that the organization needed new people, new priorities, and new policies. A key to our change was a complete shakeup in our board of directors, which is shown here. Previously, the board was filled primarily with those inside the sport who had difficulty holding their friends and peers accountable. The role of our new board is to act as high-level advisors. They're involved with very important and strategic decisions that we make. Half of them are independent, so meaning that they come from outside of the sport, no gymnastics connection. And they have external expertise like CEOs of companies, child advocates, communications professionals, medical doctors, and other specialties. 1/3 of our board members are either former or current athletes from different disciplines. And we also just recently added a survivor representative, which really has been beneficial to us to have that voice at our table. The makeup of the board is critical as we want to ensure that many different viewpoints are being represented when big decisions are being made. We also have a lot of new people. So over 70% of the employees in the organization have been hired since 2019. Lily brought her vision and philosophy to the organization and really went to work hiring an all-new leadership team. I started with the organization in December of 2019, and as Chief of Athlete Wellness, my sole focus is the holistic well-being of our athletes. I ensure that they have access to high-quality medical care that's provided in a safe environment where we follow safe sport principles. 2 adults have to be present at all times, and athletes know that they can withdraw their consent for treatment at any time. That holistic wellness also encompasses mental health care, sports nutritionist services and education, healthy meals and snacks at camps and national team events, and many other things. I, along with our member services team, also ensure that parents, athletes, and coaches at all levels of our sport are provided ongoing education on these topics, as well as minor athlete abuse prevention principles, positive coaching, injury prevention, mindfulness, and the importance of balance in life. As a member of the executive leadership team at USA Gymnastics, my voice representing the well-being of our athletes is always at the table when decisions are being made, and I take that responsibility very, very seriously. When hiring new people, we're looking for hard and soft skills. So the hard skills, of course, being what's on paper. Do they have the actual experience to do the job? But we really also look at the soft skills. So is this person applying for the role because they're purpose-driven? Are they a mission-driven individual? Are they applying because they believe in the greater good? And do they believe in what we're trying to achieve? And more importantly, we look for people who have no ego. So people who are teamwork oriented, who are willing to roll up their sleeves and get the work done, people who are not going to put themselves first, because we know that in order to achieve what we needed to do, we would all have to be very flexible. So we were really lucky to attract very good talent, not only at the leadership level, but also amongst all levels of staff who are aligned with our mission. Another key change in people was that an internal safe sport team was developed. So previously, misconduct complaints went to the CEO, who decided what to do. Now there's an internal safe sport department made up of legal counsel and investigators who independently decide how to handle cases. In our policies, the CEO and other members of our leadership team are prohibited from being involved in a safe sport case and influencing a decision. There's also a safe sport committee who assists with developing and implementation of policies and monitors USA Gymnastics compliance with our safe sport policies and procedures. So one of the keys to establishing new priorities is a new mission. We developed a new mission statement, which you can see here. Our mission is to build a community and culture of health, safety, and excellence where athletes can thrive in sport and in life. This is what anchors the organization in every decision that we make. And you can see from this mission that the priorities of the organization were shifted to focus on the holistic development of athletes, not the technical development of athletes. As part of our new priorities, we also developed a number of new policies. So in addition to new bylaws, a new safe sport policy, and a new code of ethical conduct, we also developed an athlete bill of rights, making us the first national governing body to do so. And we'll dig into these in a little bit, but it's important to note that each of these rights is codified in our policies so that violations can be reported to the safe sport team or to our ethics and grievance committee. There's accountability inherent in this Bill of Rights, which is really crucial to its success. So we broadcast our new Athletes Bill of Rights far and wide within our community, and I'm going to share with you all how we did that.
The right to participate.
I have the right to participate. All athletes have the right to participate.
Regardless of my age,
regardless of my race,
My ethnicity,
my gender,
sexual orientation,
my gender identity,
disability.
and regardless of my religion.
All athletes have the right to an equal opportunity.
I have the right to equal opportunity.
I have the right to start a success.
I have the right to train and compete in a safe environment. One that is free from violence,
free from bullying.
free from harassment or abuse in any form.
Athlete health is the priority.
My health is the priority.
I have the right to protect my mental health.
Physical and emotional health. I have the right to rest and to recover. I have the right to be treated fairly.
With dignity and respect. With dignity and respect. All athletes have the right to fail without fear.
I have the right to fail without fear.
I have the right to knowledge.
The right to be prepared. The right to be coached well.
All athletes have the right to question behavior and report misconduct.
Without fear of retaliation or punishment.
I have the right to a fair process.
A transparent process.
And one that is free from conflicts.
I have the right to speak up and speak out. Speak up and speak out.
I have the right to speak up and speak out. My voice matters.
My voice matters. My voice matters. My
Voice
Matters.
I love that video. So new priorities and policies are great, but really without accountability, they don't mean much. So it's absolutely essential that we hold ourselves as well as our community accountable. Every decision sets a precedent and sends a message. Accountability is a key factor of success in athlete safety, because if people think that they won't be held accountable or think that they can get away with doing bad things, they will continue that behavior. And we really want to create a hostile environment for predators and bad actors. For ourselves at the national office, we have terminated more than one employee for failing to immediately report suspected abuse. We have zero tolerance and are holding ourselves to a higher standard of accountability. Within our member clubs, we've instituted a safety champion program, which requires all member clubs to designate a person who helps to foster a safe environment and serves as a point person with us on safety issues, including policy clarification, educational requirements, and resources for athletes, parents, and staff. So how did we successfully implement these changes? Again, I have to emphasize that we set priorities. So we didn't try to do everything. We do recognize that resources are limited and you can't be everything to everyone. So we made sure that we focused on the things that would have the most impact. We aligned with our mission. Every decision we make goes back to our mission and organizational values. And we ask ourselves, is this in the best interest of our athletes and the community? We use consistent messaging and communication. It's important to make sure your messaging is clear and know that you can never repeat yourself too many times on these important points. It's important to strike the right tone and content. We've made a decided change in our tone to one that is friendly, supportive, and engaging, especially on social media. Athlete wellness is holistically integrated into all facets of our organization. Athlete health and wellness is not just my responsibility, it's really part of everyone's role. And performance metrics are looked at with every single staff member. Every staff member is measured on how they're delivering with regards to and aligning with our mission. Every single corporate partnership that we bring on is mandated to invest a portion of their partnership toward athlete wellness initiatives. Safe sport is an agenda topic at every board of directors and all staff meeting. We work with well-respected external partners and integrate them into our education and training. So partners like the Aspen Institute and Positive Coaching Alliance. And we listen to our athletes. So another thing that we did was listen to our athletes. We wanted to ensure that they always had a voice at the table. We joined our athletes in being catalysts for change. We worked hard to create anonymous feedback loops for our athletes so that they could provide open, honest, and candid feedback in a safe space. This includes anonymous surveys and reporting apps like Real Response. Members of the leadership team meet with our athletes council at least twice a month. We're always trying to hear what they have to say. And at least a third of our board and a third of every committee that we have must be filled with athlete representation. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have community buy-in from all levels and sectors of the community. We identified key influencers throughout this transformation to help champion and spread our message. And we also continue to progress. We always tell ourselves, well, we've done a lot of work. We know that we can do more. We will never be content with where we are, a bit like our athletes who are always striving to be the best that they can be. We know that all of our policies, all of our procedures and documents can always be improved on, so we never settle. After a policy has been implemented for several months or a year, we always go back and look at it again and see if there are any tweaks we can make or if there are ways to make it better. Ultimately, we had a paradigm shift in our mindset and became a service-based organization, one that exists to serve our athletes in the overall gymnastics community. And I wanted to share the video that brings this all to life. It really encapsulates and demonstrates what we stand for and who we aspire to be.
Thanks.
So we believe that the movement starts here. And I hope that after my presentation today, you understand what we mean by that. So thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Kim, for that thorough, engrossing presentation. You really walked us through the experiences of athletes who've experienced human rights abuses, and where USAG has been and where they hope to be. I give you a lot of credit for coming here today and representing an organization that many would say have failed athletes. So it's really special that you're with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to point out that last video was there. There wasn't audio, but I mean, we saw a lot of the stuff where people talking. What I can do is share that with folks after the presentation, but I mean, I saw the words, I saw the children. There's a lot of great imagery there. I just wasn't sure if we were missing out on some critical.
It was some wonderful music, but that was about it.
I had a feeling, yeah, it was really good music, but you could really get the sense from the imagery, but we can always send that to folks, so thank you. We'll open it up now to questions from folks, but I do have a question. I'm curious, what kind of feedback are you getting from your athletes regarding the changes that have been made with USAG so far?
Yeah, so, I will say that I've been with the organization now a little over 3 years, and early on, the feedback that we got from athletes was a little bit like, we don't believe you, prove it. So, we knew we had a lot of work to do. More recently, we're getting a lot of positive feedback from athletes. And recently, so we had an event at the end of February, and Shawn Johnson, who many of you remember as a very high profile Olympian, was at that event with her little daughter, and she did a YouTube video of her experience at the event. And in that video, she said she could really sense the difference in the organization and felt like this event made her realize how gymnastics could be. The athletes were happy, they were having fun, they were all enjoying their time. And that was really validating for us, right? To hear that from someone who had lived through the prior regime. And so we're hearing a lot of great feedback from our athletes. Every year we do, I do an annual athlete health and wellness survey. And we ask them a lot of questions about their satisfaction with the organization. And well over 90% of athletes feel like, and these are our national team athletes, feel like the organization is giving them everything that they need to succeed. And so that's really great. So we are now getting that feedback. They understand that we mean it.
Oh, that's great. My next question that kind of leads right into the next one. So we saw with an earlier presentation on sexual abuse of athletes that research is being done to understand the frequency with which certain experiences they have. So how does USA Gymnastics measure success? It sounds like if this feedback survey, are you explicitly, measuring, are they experiencing these abuses still? I know you're doing satisfaction, but how do you know that the abuse isn't happening?
So the U.S. Center for Safe Sport handles all reports of sexual abuse. And so we are able to get some information through the U.S. Center for Safe Sport on what is happening within our sport. Sexual abuse is still happening, right? It's a very difficult thing to stop. But what we do know is that when it happens, athletes are reporting it, and the people who are perpetrating this abuse are being held accountable. So I think that's really encouraging.
We do have a question in this. I share this sentiment, but it's shocking to learn that there are no coaching certification in the US. You say that there is in the EU, though. Is this the case for all types of coaches in the US or just gymnastics?
This is for all types of coaches in the US. So again, there are some organizations who have some coaching infrastructure, education infrastructure, but it's not required in general in youth sports in the United States. And so for those people who are listening to this call from other countries, Canada and Great Britain, they have very well established pathways for coaching education and licensure. And that's just not something that we're doing in the United States. We have no Ministry of Sport in the US, like in many other countries where those regulations and those requirements come through. And it is really one of the things that we see very often in safe sport complaints that we see that are around emotional misconduct is that coaches just don't have a good understanding of child development, and they think that being sarcastic with 8 and 9-year-olds is a great way to coach them, but those kids at that age don't understand sarcasm, and so just having some basic education around child development principles, I think, would be huge for youth sports in our country.
And also, how do you think we could help you to develop these coaching standards and bills of rights to get accepted by all sports organizations?
I mean, I think in our country, it has to go through legislature. I would be a huge proponent of developing, you know, an organization similar to a ministry of sport. It's the only way really to make it universal across all sports. There's got to be some pathway. There's got to be some required education or licensure pathway for coaches.
I'd like to ask this question. I was, well, it's clear, Kim, that you're dedicated to improving the lives of gymnasts, and that's incredibly admirable. And I mean that. I think it's so great you're here with us today. And just in the spirit of good journalism and healthy academic debate on human rights in sports, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to some criticism that I saw. I just did a cursory search, and I came across an independent gymnast blog posting from 2021 that referenced the 2017 Deborah and Daniels report that's on the USA Gymnastics proposed policy and procedures changes that was written, to which the organization responded to. And on page 37, one of the recommendations was to have, quote, seek individuals with expertise in child protection for the leadership team. And so this gymnast blog in 2021 wrote that, quote, for all intents and purposes, Kim Kranz sounds like a wonderful person who is highly qualified for the role in which she was initially hired for. The problem is she does not have any qualification in the realm of child protection, unquote. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this.
Well, I think I have a few thoughts. Although, you know, I don't have a background in that side of things as a medical provider, as a physical therapist, I've always seen myself as an advocate for children, but I'm not the only one. And so I think that's the key here, right? Is we have a full safe sport team, probably one of the largest safe sport teams in any NGB. So we have legal counsel and investigators. Most of our investigators come through Department of Child and Family Services as their background. We also work with a lot of people in sports psychology from the USOPC. So there are people around me and within the organization who have a lot of this expertise and have been excellent in working with us on making these changes.
So it sounds like child protection is woven into all the other positions or the people you consult with, and it doesn't necessarily rest on one person's shoulders, as this blogger suggested.
That is correct. Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on time almost. I don't know, is there anything else you want to leave us with, or any final thoughts you have for us today?
I mean, I think, you know, for me, I hope what people take away from my presentation is how many gaps there still are in the system. And really looking at that, as a parent, when you take your kid to sports, you need to ask those questions. How is my child being protected? What's going to happen if, you know, the coach is abusively yelling at these kids all the time, right? As parents, we've all seen this when we're on the sidelines of our kids' games. And very often there are zero protections for these athletes. So I just encourage everybody to ask those questions, be proactive, and really look out for your kids.
Excellent. Thank you for those parting words, and thank you for being an advocate for human rights in sports, and for being with us today. This is a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
With that, folks, we're going to take another about 15-minute break, and we'll resume at 1 p.m. EST. See you soon.